It is Election Day Eve, and some 41 million Americans have already voted ahead of tomorrow. Lisa Desjardins begins our extensive coverage of the 2022 midterm elections.
Across the country, close, dramatic elections and big closing issues, including in key state Georgia.
Top of my mind, especially being in Georgia, is women's rights. And of course, the economy is a concern as well. But top concern for me, women's rights.
I already voted, and economy, security, national security, those types of things.
And as far as closing messages, Peachtree State Governor Brian Kemp stuck to that. Republicans' #1 theme, the economy.
We've had a great team in Georgia for a long time. That's why our state's doing so well. Despite Joe Biden's 40-year high inflation, a disaster at the gas pump, a disaster at the border in Washington, D.C.
Polls indicate Kemp has an edge over voting rights activist Stacey Abrams. Even more eyes, though, are on Georgia's U.S. Senate race, a must-win for Democrats. Incumbent Raphael Warnock is now in a dead heat with Republican challenger and former NFL star Herschel Walker. Their final plays? Words about high stakes.
I'm that warrior for God that is sick and tired of them trying to destroy this country.
I think competence matters. You should ask yourself if the person you're voting for has actually demonstrated any interest in the subject matter.
But nowhere are there more messages and more politicians than Pennsylvania, with its toss-up Senate race. Republican TV doctor Mehmet Oz's closing plan is to send messages to very different groups. He sat down with moderate U.S. Senator Susan Collins in swing Buck County and separately appeared with President Trump in Latrobe. Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman brought in a president himself and one of Democrats' most popular figures, former President Barack Obama, as his Senate race closer.
Fundamental rights are on the ballot.
Current President Joe Biden finds himself with low approval ratings and his Democrats on the back foot in even some deep blue places like New York State, where he campaigned for Governor Kathy Hochul this weekend on a message about democracy.
Look, this election isn't a referendum, it's a choice. It's a choice between two fundamentally different visions of America.
Hochul faces a strong challenge from Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin in a state that hasn't elected a GOP governor in 2 decades. It's not just message, but also audience. Among former President Trump's other stops was this one yesterday in Miami, part of a key GOP demographic strategy this year.
The socialist, communist, and Marxist direction of the radical Democrat Party is one of the biggest reasons that Hispanic Americans are joining our movement by the millions and millions and millions.
The weekend battle of the presidents also raged in Nevada, where former President Bill Clinton campaigned for vulnerable Senator Catherine Cortez Masto with a closing message of moderation.
She doesn't go around demonizing Republicans. She just gets up and does what she thinks right.
But some newcomers have dominated headlines by throwing fire, like Arizona gubernatorial candidate Kari Lake, one of the GOP's most high-profile election deniers, who pounds away about the border.
I no longer want Arizona to be overrun with drugs and have the cartels controlling this border. This is our border, and we will build that wall. We will build the wall, and they're going to have to stop us from building the wall.
Aiming to stop Lake from winning is Arizona Secretary of State and Democratic candidate for governor Katie Hobbs, whose closing message is a plea for democracy.
It is a choice between sanity and chaos. It's going to be close. Every single poll has us tied, and that means we need every single person in this room to vote.
36 governor's races as well as 35 Senate seats, and all 435 House seats are up for grabs on tomorrow's ballot.
And Lisa joins me now, along with White House correspondent Laura Barron Lopez, to share with us what they're watching for during these final hours. Hello to both of you. And Laura, I'm going to start with you. When you put it all together, what do you see as the party's closing messages, in particular from the president and others?
So for President Biden, as well as Democrats, it really comes down to 3 main things: the economy, democracy, and abortion. And we've seen in these closing weeks that the president, as well as former President Obama, have on the economy focused on not just what President Biden passed, trying to show that things like the Inflation Reduction Act, specifically prescription drug reform, could eventually help people and their pocketbooks, but also Social Security and Medicare. And so what they're looking at specifically there and what they've seized on is proposals by Republicans to cut spending for these safety net programs. And we heard Obama as well as President Biden talk about this a lot when they were traveling the country in the last few weeks. And then on democracy, President Biden really feels this very closely. It's part of why he ran for president when he saw threats in Charlottesville in 2017 with neo-Nazis rallying. And what the historians that talk to the president say that he really feels a need as the president to interject and say that he sees it as a big defining issue this election cycle, that there are a number of Republican candidates who say that they may very well not accept the election results if they lose.
And Laura, what about the issue of abortion? It was something that the Democrats had put a lot of stock in, making a difference for them. Where has it ended up?
So Democrats have clearly wanted abortion 5 months away from the Supreme Court decision to stay front of mind for voters. We've seen ads like one from Senator Catherine Cortez Masto in Nevada, really trying to strike this contrast with her opponent, Adam Laxalt, on the issue of abortion. As well as Democratic candidate for governor in Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, focusing specifically saying that it isn't freedom to tell women what they can and can't do with their bodies. But two quick anecdotes for you, Judy. When I was in Michigan, every Democratic voter that I talked to named abortion or democracy as the issues that were defining who they were going to vote for at the ballot box. I also recently spoke to a Pennsylvania voter, an older woman, who says that she's voting for Democrats based on abortion because of the fact that she has a 16-year-old granddaughter. She voted for Trump in 2016, voted for Biden in 2020, and she also told me that she knows at least a dozen women who are going to vote for Democrats based on abortion and not tell their spouses or not tell their families. So I think that there could potentially be an element there of a silent abortion voter this year.
Really, really interesting. So Lisa, that's the Democrats. What about the Republicans, their closing messages?
Well, I think to Democrats, 3 points. Republicans certainly have 3 points as well. And I think our viewers won't be surprised what's at the top of their message. The message they've had this entire election, inflation and the economy, they are driving that home still. But to that, I think we're seeing them ramp up, especially on crime. And the idea that crime, especially in cities where there are many Democratic voters, that they would like to stay home, and suburban women outside those cities who they are hoping to bring into the Republican fold. Those are messages we see a lot from Republicans right now. And one more, we're seeing some Republicans, to all of these negative ads, throw in something more human. For example, Senator Ron Johnson in Wisconsin has an ad now where he's raking leaves, very in contrast to sort of the tone we've seen for most of this campaign. So one of these ads that displays this is something I've been looking at from Lee Zeldin, the Republican gubernatorial candidate in New York, hoping to regain the governor's mansion there. Look at this ad. He's showing his children, first of all. That's him as a human. And then this ad pivots from his children to crime. Now, there was a shooting in front of his house in the last month, and he's trying to make that connection while using his family to make that point. One other thing Republicans are running on, Judy, the answer to the democracy question for Democrats, they're talking about nationalism. They're trying to say that the kind of fabric of the country is at stake.
And so, Lisa, we are seeing in a number of the polls moving in the Republicans' direction. You've been talking to them. What do they think their chances are?
Very good. And I think if you talk to Republicans and Democrats alike, they would all tell you, and they have told me, that momentum has been swinging Republicans' way in these last crucial few weeks. Now, when you talk about the House, first of all, Republicans need to pick up 5 seats in the House, as many of our viewers know. Some Republicans think they will do much better than that. And in fact, I've spoken to Democrats who believe they could even lose 40 or more seats in this election. Is that likely? They will say no, but is it possible? Yes. Now to the Senate, Republicans just need to pick up 1 seat, and it does seem like it is a toss-up, very close. Many close races, don't know how they will go, but it's interesting that some of the seats Republicans thought were way out of reach, like New Hampshire, where Maggie Hassan is up against Don Bolduc, suddenly is more competitive. So the timing here of tomorrow's vote and the vote that have been accumulated the last couple of weeks really matters.
And Lisa, at least one other thing you've been following, and that is the number of candidates who are election deniers, the 2020 election. What are you seeing there?
This is so important. This is something Laura and I have been talking about a lot and looking at. We have carefully looked at all of the Republican candidates for governor and secretary of state, looked at what they've said, analyzed what are their positions on the 2020 election, because it may tell us something important about future elections if they win. I want to show you the map of the Secretary of State Republican nominees. In dark purple, purple, those are Republican nominees who have flatly denied the 2020 election results. You see many of them in states where they are likely to win, like South Dakota. However, some are in states that have competitive races like Arizona, where we'll be watching. And I want to talk about two candidates in particular. Mark Finchem, who is the Secretary of State nominee in Arizona. He is a self-proclaimed member of the Oath Keepers. And in addition, Kristina Karamo, who is the Secretary of State, that's Mark Finchem right there. He has said he will not concede if he loses. Kristina Karamo in Michigan similarly has not said if she will concede. In fact, just today in the last few hours, Judy, she lost a lawsuit in Detroit where she was trying to get tens of thousands of ballots thrown out. That lawsuit has been lost, but it may be an impetus for her to say, if she loses, that she's not going to concede. All very meaningful and important to watch.
No question about it, and so glad you are continuing to do that. And finally, Laura, in connection with all that, these claims that the election there may be rampant fraud in parts of this election. What effect is that having on the people who work around these elections?
It's having a significant effect. And I spoke to an election official today who told me that what's keeping them up at night is the post-election period. So these lies about election fraud, which of course there was no widespread fraud in 2020, a lot of these election officials expect this election to go off smoothly from an administrative level. But they're very worried that once the polls close and that period between polls closing and when the results are actually certified, that's what they're most concerned about. I also spoke to Catherine Kennelly, who's with the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. She tracks extremism, and she said that already they've seen an increase in the number of legitimate threats released across social media platforms like Gab, Facebook, threats that are being directed towards election officials, and that there has been an increase in that, and that these are very specific threats.
And I know these are all things we are going to be following very, very carefully tomorrow and tomorrow night. Laura Barone Lopez, Lisa Desjardins, thank you both.
Thank you.